Hi everyone. Let's go ahead and start our section 3 of chapter 18. And as you can see from this objective slide, it is a massive chapter, isn't it? Or not chapter, but a massive section here. This is going through all of your formed elements. So it's going through erythrocytes, it's going through leukocytes, it's going through platelets, but it's also going through blood types with erythrocyte. It's also going through how all these formed elements are made. So there's quite a bit in this section. So we're going to be chopping this section up into multiple videos. So the first thing that we want to do is let's talk about how formed elements are even made in the first place. So let's break down this word up here, hemopoiesis. So poiesis, anytime you see this term, this root word right here, it's going to mean production of. There it is, right there, production of. And then, of course, just look to whatever's before it. It's going to kind of tell you what we're producing. So hemo, it can also be hemato. Sometimes you'll see hematopoiesis, which is fine. You can use that as well. But hemopoiesis, hemo is going to refer back to blood. So, but this is going in and looking specifically at the production of the formed elements of the blood. So this is going in and looking at not only red blood cells, but white blood cells and platelets. So a lot of times people will get this confused. Oh, hemopoiesis, that's just red blood cell production. No. It's going to be all the formed element production of all of those. So that is that word. But this occurs in red bone marrow of certain bones. So in the very last section, we'll kind of talk about development. We'll talk about how blood formation actually starts in the yolk sac until eventually, in the fetus, until eventually red bone marrow is formed. Over time, as an adult, so infants and children will mainly have red bone marrow. But as an adult, as we get older, a lot of the red bone marrow is going to switch over to yellow bone marrow. So there's just, if you're looking at adult, there's only certain places where red bone marrow is going to be found. So like your flat bones, this is given a really good example of where it's found. It's flat bones, it's there's ribs, there's your sternum, it's looking at the epiphyses of long bones. But really, it's only the proximal epiphyses as we get older. There's, of course, your vertebra. You've got lots of red bone marrow in there, and the pelvis as well. So that's going to be where the main production of blood is going to be done, is in those certain spots. So let's take a look at what's going on here in that red bone marrow. This is what's going on in that red bone marrow. That's a lot happening there, right? So just bear with me and kind of follow me along this chart here. I'm going to start with this big cell right here, this hemocytoblast. This is going to be known as kind of the grandmother of all of the formed elements. Because if I look at it, here's the grandkids, all of these right here, right? And then here is mom's, his mom and aunt maybe, I don't know, and then there's grandma. So all of these formed elements are going to come from grandma right there. So the hemocytoblast is going to be the hemopoietic stem cell. This is going to be that wonderful pluripotent stem cell. Pluripotent mean that it can give rise to erythrocytes, or it can give rise to lymphocytes or platelets or eosinophils and things like that. So this is going to differentiate, and it's going to give rise to two different lines, two different stem cells. It's going to give rise to, I wrote over the name, so let me go through and erase that name, erase everything off of there. There we go. So hemocytoblast is going to differentiate into two cells, a myeloid stem cell, and it's going to also give rise to a lymphoid stem cell. So this is where the differentiation kind of breaks apart. The fact that this lymphoid stem cell is only going to give rise to lymphocytes. I mean, look, it tells you in its name what it's giving rise to, right? Lymphoid lymphocytes. We'll talk about the T cells, natural killer cells later on. The myeloid stem cell is going to give rise to every other formed element. It's going to give rise to erythrocytes, all of the other leukocytes except the lymphocytes, and also this big giant thing called a megakaryocyte, which is going to come, the platelets are going to come from. So let's point out some other things. As we go into each of the little formed elements, when I talk about erythrocytes, we'll kind of get into this a little bit more. I'll let you know everything that I want you guys to know in that. But let's take a look at some other things that are boxed in. Look, you see multi-CSF. You have EPO right here. EPO, there's thrombopoietin. So these are going to be the different substances and hormones that are going to allow this process to occur. And that's what this is going through. So the multi-CSF is going to be a colony stimulating factor, multi-colony stimulating factor. Those are all going to, these little growth factors or stimulating factors right here, I thought I could circle them, are going to stimulate the production of leukocytes. So what do you think the name of the production of leukocytes would be? That is, of course, going to be leukopoiesis. So all of these are going to stimulate leukopoiesis. Thrombopoietin is going to be a growth factor. So growth factors are very similar to hormones. But see, it stimulates the production of that big giant megakaryocyte and eventually forms platelets. So again, what do you think the production of platelets or thrombocyte, what would that be called? Thrombopoiesis. So let's write down. So this is going to initiate am I spelling that right? Thrombopoiesis. And then hopefully this is familiar. I didn't mean to cross it out. I meant to underline it. But hopefully this is familiar to you already. This erythropoietin, this EPO, because we went through it in chapter 17. It's produced by the kidneys. It's a hormone produced by the kidneys. And this is what's going to stimulate erythropoiesis, or the production of red blood cells, erythrocytes. So let me see if I can write that down as well, erythropoiesis. Very good. All right, let's take a look at erythropoiesis a little bit more. Red blood cell production. So red blood cell production, of course, is going to require amino acids. We'll talk about why later on when we get into erythrocytes. It requires iron, B vitamins, specifically B12. But really what happens is that it comes from that myeloid stem cell, and then it's going to go through and turn into these various different types of erythroblasts. I wouldn't worry so much about where's pro-erythroblast, early and late erythroblast, but you're going to have these various stages of a erythroblast. What's happening here is that you have amino acids, you have this nice nucleus in here. It is going in and producing a ton of hemoglobin. That's its main function, is going out and spitting out as much hemoglobin as possible. Eventually it turns into this normoblast, more hemoglobin, and this normoblast is actually going to spit out that nucleus. Don't need that nucleus anymore, and we'll talk about that later on. And that turns into something called a reticulocyte. This reticulocyte is going to, this is the point where it enters circulation. This reticulocyte is going to enter into the circulation. All of these are in the bone marrow. This gets spit out into the normal circulation. About a day or two, it's a reticulocyte, and then it eventually turns into this erythrocytes, where it's pretty much got rid of all of the organelles, and it's straight up hemoglobin with a little bit of some spectrum protein as well. And we'll talk about that when we get to the erythrocytes. So now let's take a look at leukopoiesis, a little bit more complicated. And again, don't worry, we're really not going to go through all of this stuff in between at all. But let's take a look and see. So you have this, here is that progenitor cell, that myeloid stem cell. And you don't even have to worry about these different factors either. As long as you kind of know the general colony stimulating factor is fine. But as you can see, you are going to have this monocyte line that's going to eventually turn into a monocyte. But then you're going to have this granulocyte line, and they are going to give rise to all of the granulocytes. A monocyte's an agranulocyte, and so is the lymphocyte. So we'll talk about that when we get to the leukocytes later on. So bringing us to our lymphocytes, there it is. You basically just need to know there's the lymphocyte stem cell, and it is going to give rise to different lymphocytes. Let's take a look at thrombopoiesis. So again, you have that myeloid stem cell through thrombopoiesis. There's thrombopoietin. This is the big one that I want you to care about so much that I just put a line over. Megakaryocyte. I thought it was going to, yeah, luckily it is written again on there so you can read it better right there. It is going to be this huge, giant, massive cell. And what it's going to do is we're going to look at this picture here, and let's just take a look at it now. Look at these megakaryocytes. They're like kind of hanging out, sitting on top of the capillaries that are going to be found inside of the bone marrow. And it's like their feet are getting sliced off. Look, it's like slicing off their little feet. And that's what makes platelets. So it's kind of like if you went to sit at the end of a dock, you put your feet in the water, and I don't know, something came in and just sliced them right off, your toes right off, or something like that. That's a horrible thing to think about, right? But that's how these are formed. It's really kind of an interesting thing there. All right, so the next video that basically concludes hemopoiesis or hematopoiesis. What we're going to talk about in the next video is we're going to concentrate specifically on those erythrocytes and take a look a little bit more at them. So until next time.